We've heard a lot about open source, which is cool, and the benefits or pieces of that. But I'm interested in. I think Jos mentioned the importance of having a very rich and complete solution with all this functionality in it. So I was wondering, Holger, how you integrate functionality, or how does open source help you build a much richer product offering there? And I'll just go through and ask the same question to everyone, so everyone gets a chance.
I guess there are different philosophies in that regards, right? It's possible to build everything into one thing, or it's proper to find the right integration points with the right APIs to be able to select best of breed open source applications and integrate, as an example, with RocketJet or MetaMost, etc. That's both, I think, has some value into itself. For ourselves, I have to say, as a small company, roughly 60 people, we really concentrate on content collaboration and those type of things, and then leverage Jitsi, RocketJet, and other open source things, or of course Collabora here, in order to deliver the complete solutions the customers require. That's kind of how I think about it, because I think for smaller companies it's tough to do all of this at the same time, and there are just many great open source offerings out there. As an example, Lime Survey from a poll perspective, that there's so many great ones out there, or HumHub for the type of things where people want to do kind of social collaboration. So lots of things out there which can be integrated.
Cool. Well, thanks, Holger. Peter, tell me about integrating open source. I guess that's a very core part of what you're doing. It's all built on open source. But what benefits does open source then bring you to their business in terms of choosing to build things yourself versus reusing stuff?
Yeah, I think I'd like to further iterate on what Holger said. That is, of course, the big question. Do you want to do everything on your own? And at some point, I think we all agree that at some point you can't do it. You have to be open for others, and you have to integrate with others, because you can't do everything. And to be honest, we also don't want just one company, one open source product doing everything. We want competition, and we want ecosystems, and we want innovation driven by independent parties. And on the other side, if you do everything on your own, you in some parts can do it in a better way, because you are you are the same entity, and you don't have to have these long discussions about do we want the API this way around or that way around, and so I think there will never be the one solution to this, or the one answer to this questions. And I think both the approach of Nextcloud and the approach of OnCloud are right in their own way. And more generally spoken, I think for many of the end users of open source software, it is a very important point that they have the ability to do these integrations, that it is possible, and that it is even possible to maintain to maintain compatibility of APIs a little bit longer than the vendor does. Of course, this causes you pain, and of course, you do not want to do this for years, and of course, you don't want to fork software. But the dirty reality out there is that in those large installations of enterprise software, you have old parts of software. You have old stuff running where you need to keep compatibility for maybe a half year longer than what the vendor says. And then this is possible, and you can hire someone to do this. And this is really, really an important thing. And it's really a very big difference to some proprietary software where the vendor tells you, well, you are on your own, and no, there's absolutely no way to get this security fix into the software you have. And so that is important for the end user organizations to in the end be faster, produce better information technology, because if you can keep compatibility up for maybe half a year, that allows you to concentrate on your other big project. And what we see in large IT environments quite often is that all those resources are needed to migrate from one system to another system, from Microsoft Office on-premise to Microsoft 365, from let's say from one exchange version to the another exchange version, and so on. And they are and the whole resources are stuck with this task, and the ability to make your own decisions there, and maybe to hire someone who can help you for less money to keep this compatibility up, or to make a little add-on which helps you for 3 months in a special situation, is really a very important part of open source. And of course, it is also a very important part of those who work with the vendors to integrate all these different systems to one easy usable system like we do. And so we heavily benefit from it.
Yeah. Awesome. I see Jean-Marie. Do you want to jump in quickly, or do you want to? Because I just like to give Jos and Philippe a chance to sort of respond to that as well.
No, I can ask my question a bit later. It's quite an open question anyway. So
good man, excellent. Just the kind we like. Jos, do you want to talk about then the benefits of open source, and how you make those decisions, and I guess user experience, and all of that brings to your combination?
Right. Yeah, that's also why in the talk I gave, I quickly showed, of course, our integration. We have probably more integrations than, well, most other companies here, with over 200 apps and all these things like integration with Moodle, as I showed, a whole bunch of other platforms. So of course, I think our focus here is to build the core, which is a collaboration platform, and try and integrate with things that are less core than pure collaboration. I think this is all fairly obvious, and I think that's where the user experience matters. So not rebuilding entire platforms, but build the user interface part. This is, of course, why we're working very close with you to try and have this user experience, which is the key. And if you mesh together different platforms without taking good care of this user experience, then you don't get that, and people will, well, the end users will not be terribly happy, I suppose. But rather than going into this, I wanted to try to answer Robert Riemann's questions in the chat, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, well, we can get to those. Why don't we just let Philippe say something, and we'll come around again. Philippe, right. Any extra thoughts on open source, and then we'll try and work out.
On open source and, excuse me?
So how you use open source, and what benefits it provides to your business there, I guess.
I think that's why I tried to answer in my first talk, but for the business of our clients, I think is the most point. And yeah, I would like to insist also, so to one of the main points is trust. I think that's a final point, but it's based on different advantages like transparency, but I think that's the point that allows this long-term relationship I was talking about. No, I don't have any more information or thoughts about that.
No, that's great. So I don't know who was first. Was it Jean-Marie or was it Robert Riemann? I don't know.
I think Robert was first.
Robert was first. Then we must be absolutely fair and go in complete order. So question one is rather a technical question. It's a very good question. If you were with us yesterday, you would have seen the incredible amount of work we're doing on performance and sharing. And it's extraordinary, actually. The improvements that have been made in the last 3 months in Collabora Online are quite extraordinary. So really, I'd encourage you to update if you haven't used it recently. It turns out that we, like you, thought that network latency was important, or the preeminent problem here. And it turns out that having spent lots of time working on network latency, actually just silly things in browser JavaScript are the problem, and or silly things on the server side. Why render the documents when you can be fooling around maintaining lists of things you don't need? So we've had some very, very significant performance improvements there. I really encourage you to try it again. In terms of efficiency, I mean, we see customers with out there using actually Collabora Office in VDI situations, which are horribly inefficient. Like there's almost nothing shared in a VDI, or very little shared in a VDI situation. You're running a whole operating system almost from the ground up in virtual machines, and yet for some reason thousands of people use this. Now we're orders of magnitude more efficient than that in terms of sharing lots of information, lots of the dictionaries, the libraries, the setup and this thing. So our footprint is very small per document, and so it's quicker to load the document on the fast server, in some spare cycles when people are not typing, and render it and show it to you, than it is to try and download the document, download JavaScript, try and interpret it in some way and then render it. So you get a snappier, better, or lower power solution. So I think it's pretty compelling. The second question, I think Jos was coming to. So procurement, I think that's a really, really good question. So from our perspective, I don't want to answer this question because, well, we have partners for this. You have just the most amazing relationships with all sorts of routes to market, and so that's really, we are a overly technical organization, and but that's why we love to work with our partners in market that can talk to our work with our customers. So do you want to pick that up again? Who wants to pick up that procurement and public authority?
I could answer that perhaps, because I think that partnership is a big answer here. It varies, of course, between countries in Europe, but in the end, what you often need is one of the big companies that governments like to work with as a partner to deliver these things, or you team up with others. So, for example, in the German-speaking countries, Nextcloud, together with Univention and Open Exchange, we are offering the Sovereign Productivity Stack, SPS, to governments and government entities, which offers, well, first of all, because we're working together, a larger organization that's also not that young, right? I mean, we have all of our companies have quite some history and experience, and this helps, I think, a fair bit, especially with procurement with bigger governments. And then, of course, by working with bigger partners like Telecom, Deutsche Telekom, Ionos, the largest hosting provider of Europe. That gives you often the credibility that you need. It is, of course, this is, of course, still an open question and an open issue, because as smaller businesses, you always have trouble selling to large government organizations. And I mean, from a government point of view, this is also sensible, right? If you buy from a company and they go bankrupt a year later, and you had a 5-year contract, then you lost a lot of money. Or the small company can't deliver, right? I mean, if you're IBM and you promise something to a customer and it turns out you're having trouble delivering, you can pour almost unlimited resources at it until it's fixed, right? No matter what. And this is something that smaller companies indeed have trouble delivering. But again, this is where partnerships, I think play a big role. I think Peter can perhaps speak more of it.
And I think Philippe has some great things to say about selling to government in France. That
Yeah. Maybe.
Oh,
Peter?
yeah, maybe Philippe and then Peter. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Yes, a very interesting question and difficult point in France also. And I think the problem is not that companies are small and young. ROI is small and young, small, almost 6 years. But we know well the public procurement processes. But as that's not the point, we know them well, but it's still difficult to buy because there is two ways to do that. The first way is to establish a contract to do I forget the word in English, but a kind of a.
I mean the frame contract, or
Yeah, mince. Okay, so they send a call to
A tender.
proposals.
Yeah.
A tender. Thank you.
Mhm.
But public organization in France don't like to do tender because it's time and it's a big workload also, so they don't like to do that. So they prefer to call a special gov agency called UGAP that many of you maybe know. And the problem is that this agency has to establish contact with providers and editors like you, like Collabora and Nextcloud, and then public organization can buy through this gov agency. But the problem is for us also then, because companies like us are completely out of this contract. So that's not the best way to buy finally, because public organization buy to a partner who don't know the product. So that's my problem. But and so it's still difficult in France. And maybe the best way, I was talking about with the ministry yesterday about that point. The best way is to try to help public organization to share their tender. So I was talking about that yesterday, offering to send some example of tenders done by other organizations. So maybe in France that's the one of the way, and we didn't have found the best practice so far.
Sure.
Unfortunately.
Thanks, Rick. Peter, you wanted to come in on government procurement.
just a few more words. I think the situation in Germany is quite similar to what Philippe told us about France, and also Jos correctly lined out the challenges government has with smaller companies, and some of these challenges really have good reasons. But on the other side, government does understand that this is a problem, and they want to work with smaller companies. They want to work with open source software quite often. I was in a discussion with the CIO of the federal government of Germany last week, where we discussed especially this question: what needs to be done in order for government to be able to procure more software and more solutions from smaller companies, from open source vendors, from startups. And it's not that easy. They have these huge frame contracts with companies like Capgemini, Accenture, and so on. And one way is that they require them in these frame contracts to provide services and solutions from smaller companies, and that could be one approach. Another approach is that the whole process of procurement becomes easier, that we get portals where pre-selected solutions can be procured quite easily. That's one thing which has been discussed there. And so what I basically wanted to say, the one thing is, you're right, sharing tenders is also something we made very good experiences with. Partnering is very important, but we must not forget doing our public affairs work and discuss with them how to change the whole procurement process to the better. And they are open for that. It's not a given thing. It's something.
Definitely. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I mean, I think our experience would be that if they want it enough, they will find someone to buy it from you. You know. So I think, you know, say for example, with Arrow, we support the French interministry government for all of their LibreOffice deployment together, which is great. But again, it's this multi-tier thing. It doesn't make interacting with the customer easier. Holger, you had some things to say there, I think, on the irony of file sync and sharing things not allowing you to download files and secure view and so on.
No, I think this is something which later on this afternoon Patrick will show in more detail, right, with a case study from one of our automotive customers, where we really developed with True Secure View a solution where download is just not possible, leveraging Collabora. And that's key to them, because they are doing like very sensitive, very highly confidential documents, and they shall not be downloaded. They need a watermark on every page and all those type of things. And that's nicely, only Collabora provided that function, and only the combination of Collabora and OwnCloud was able to fulfill that requirement. And we did, together with Collabora, quite some improvements on the server load, because server load was a question there. So check out in the newest versions, it's way better.
Thanks for that, Holger. I always like this irony that we add features to our products, left and right, to do cool things, share files and download stuff, and then administrators want to remove them all again, and that's, it's the sheer power of being able to do that. And of course, adapt the tools through these policies to different uses and use cases. I think it's great. So Jean-Marie, you wanted to, we'll get there in the end, and then we just got there. So look at that, fantastic. What was your question?
Yes, thank you. I have quite an open question, or maybe even a point of discussion. So everybody in this room is all about collaboration, right? And what we see, and I know it's on the mind of people here, is that we see a lot of data silos at the moment in Europe, also in the research community. And there's a lot of initiatives for, let's say, meshes, European meshes, or easier federation or federated identity things. And so this is not so much about open source, but also about open standards. And I know that some APIs are being developed, like a CS3 API and others. And but at the same time, I think it's important to have the, let's say, big tech also on board. And so how is it? What would be the best way forward to also involve them and make sure we are on their roadmap, to avoid having a really nice collaborative landscape in the open source community and a completely separate, or rather separate, landscape in the commercial or big tech industry?
That's a really good question. And just, Jean-Marie, while we're digesting that, do you want to just say a bit about yourself and Surf, and how you're using Collabora Online then?
Oh yes, well, as you know, I do have a little presentation coming up later.
Of course. So we'll wait for that. Okay, fair enough. So Jos, you wanted to address the getting big tech on board and better APIs.
Yeah, I think the answer is pretty much force them. As in, I think this is where government will have to play a role, because these companies have a powerful incentive not to do that. When you're a small player, you want an open ecosystem. When you're a big player, you want to control it. Think of Apple, and think of the enormous pressure that's now being put on them from dozens of governments all over the world to get them to just open up the App Store. They will fight tooth and nail, and the same will be for Microsoft and Google and the others. I think if you think there is a friendly, non-pressuring way to get that done, then you're going to be sorely disappointed. I think this is something where political pressure, I mean, the EU is already putting pressure here, right? And I think this is the only way to deal with this. Obviously, there are APIs we can connect to, and most of us do, right? The various solutions here, and we use already the open standards that there are. But in the end, these companies have a strong incentive to limit that and to stay in control. So it'll always be limited, I think.
Peter.
Yeah, I think that's also the discussion we are having around Gaia X, and you also mentioned this. So, and I think it's not a wrong thing to have them on board. I think if we build something powerful, and Gaia X can become something powerful, it is not yet, but the idea behind it is quite powerful, and I think it's the right idea. Build an open, federated system of software cloud providers where each service can access each piece of data independently where it is, and where you can run most of the parts also in your own data center. And by the way, in the Open Source Business Alliance, we built the foundation below it, the Sovereign Cloud Stack project. And press and a lot of people were really upset. Well, now Google and Microsoft are part of it. But yes, if the moment we become powerful ourselves, the moment we start to control this ecosystem, the moment we define those APIs, we need them on board. And they need to support our APIs. And they have smart people too, and they need to help us to build good APIs. And of course, the flip side of this is that they could use to white label, to whitewash their own stuff. And what they are doing now, and say, well, it's Gaia X, it allows for digital sovereignty, use it, and it's not. And this really requires very good governance of the whole Gaia X project, but it's not a wrong thing to have them on board.
Excellent. And I think there's just a whole load of historical precedents here on the interesting things. If you look at the Samba protocol, which was a great way of locking people in, years ago. I mean, we're now in the situation that there are Microsoft people, heavily involved in Samba 2 and working with that team, and there's a very positive, constructive relationship there. Of course, you could argue the market has slightly moved on since, and maybe this is just the open source protects your legacy long tail by doing everything excellently in the limit. But I think, we also have seen amazing things with, say, .NET opening, my friend Miguel. I think this path of positive engagement is really, really important, particularly because these guys don't want to be seen as evil and probably aren't evil. And actually, if you can help build a political environment where they can invest to do the right thing and provide space for that, and maybe also provide a motivation by political pressure, or, I think there's a helpful bifurcation there. Then I think you can do wonderful things. And actually, if you look at what Collabora is doing with this WAPI-like protocol inspiration there, I think that's kind of an encouraging thing, and it's sort of the open and well-published protocol for doing that kind of integration. I'm optimistic about that. And CS3 APIs are not massively qualitatively different from some of that WAPI stuff. They're in the same sort of place, let's say. So I don't know whether whether you guys are trying to talk with those guys get onto the committee there and so on. But I think having a positive approach often yields a less negative outcome. So, yeah. Anyone else want to chip in on APIs and CS3 and Collabora?
Maybe very quickly, really open standards are key there, and the nice thing about the open standards is they then can be enforced and regulated and demanded. And that just needs to be taken all the way through and not stopped with just talking about it like it happened with ODF, where some government and even the European Union said, oh, we're going to do this, but in practice they don't. So open standards, the establishment of those, that's key. And generally the APIs are getting somewhat more open. I mean, there is, Samba was a great example, but if it's, or SMB protocol was a great example, but of course, if it's 15 years later, fully implemented in open source, then that's too late. But then it wasn't an open standard at the beginning, because an open standard needs an open source reference implementation, otherwise it's none. So the open standard movement continues to be key for this type of interoperability.
Yeah. Anything else on that?
Well, if I can make a last remark there. So I think Mikulas is not here yet, but I think he will be present this afternoon. So because some of you mentioned political pressure, and I think that's key. I mean, of course, the solution should be technically viable, but that's maybe even the easier part. And to get the companies on board via political pressure is the more difficult part. So it would be interesting to see how the European Pirate Party sees that.
Indeed. And so, we're looking forward to hearing, what he has to say. So I think it's fantastic. From our perspective, I think at Collabora, we obviously encourage and support the OSBA and various other initiatives here. But I guess our focus is primarily on making software that's so good that people want to use it. And I think where there's a will, there's a way in procurement and in legislation, all these things. So I mean, obviously we're up against some pretty massive companies, but the products are pretty mixed as well. These giant companies with these bifurcated product portfolios and make, they often make a right mess of it in a way that small companies with a focus don't. So I think, is this the end of the Q&A? Oh, I had some more questions. Never mind. I think it's lunchtime. And we're really eager that you would eat lunch so that you can get back for, well, I think first off this Secure View presentation, followed by Jos's some case studies, interesting place in France, and a whole load of other more detailed talks from some of our panel members and other people around. So thank you so much for some great questions and some great content. Thanks to the panel members, much appreciated. It's wonderful to have that spectrum of people, from enterprise file sync and share, operating system vendors, integrators, identity provision, and just that wealth of experience around so many fields to present here today. So thanks so much. And I hope to see you all in, 50 minutes or so. All the very best. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.